Let's make another one of these.
But bigger and better.
Welcome to the Macke Makerspace.
Hi, I'm Brother Bob Macke. I'm the curator of meteorites at the Vatican Observatory. And we are in the middle of building an HO scale version of the Church of St. Ignatius in Rome, complete with Father Angelo Secchi's astrophysical observatory on the roof, to be installed in the actual church for the Jubilee Year 2025. Last time we built the facade. Now it's time to tackle the basic structure and walls of the church. There's still a lot to do, so let's get back to work. As usual, the pieces were first designed in Tinkercad before being sent to the 3D printer, and there are so many parts to keep track of. I made this Blender model to see how they all fit together. And all those pieces will need to be 3D printed individually. And you've seen me do lots of 3D printing in the past, so I didn't bother to film most of it. The big difference here is that there are so many parts that it would take several weeks of non-stop printing to make them all. I'm glad I got a good head start on this project. By way of example, here is the apse dome, and it is so big it almost didn't fit on the print bed, and it's just one of literally hundreds of parts. Oh no, what happened? In the middle of printing this part, the Prusa printer shut down with a weird error, and it just wouldn't restart. And the heating element for the hot end refused to heat up. This is the first time in 4 years that the printer broke down like this, but a little investigation found the problem. I took apart the printer, and when I removed the hot end, I saw the issue immediately. A wire to the heating element broke, so I ordered a new hot end assembly. Now I know I could have just replaced the heating element, but I replaced the whole assembly because, just because, so there. But now I have a backup unit in case I need it. It took about 3 weeks to get the replacement, during which time I wasn't working on the model and I had to do my actual job instead. Life is tough. By the way, this was during the OSIRIS-REx sample analysis back in February and March, when we were using the ideal gas pygnometer that I built in a previous video series to measure the grain densities of the samples of the asteroid Bennu. And since I had already returned to Italy, my colleagues at NASA Johnson Space Center had to operate the pygnometer for me, and I looked over their shoulder via the internet. Just thought you all might like to know. But with the new part installed, I reassembled the printer and connected the wires up, and then it's time to get back to printing. Here's the original part that broke the machine. I had to restart the print from the beginning. The second attempt, however, worked perfectly. And so I went ahead and I printed the remaining parts for the structure of the church, like this piece here. I even printed the interior of Secchi's office complex, because in the end you'll be able to look through the window and see it. Now that the parts are printed, it's time for some basic pre-assembly. These wall panels have window wells that are as deep as the full width of the actual walls of the church, and it would have been a waste of material to try to print the whole wall at that width. So instead I printed these insets for the windows that will glue onto the back of the wall face. I made an alignment jig to help me out, and since they fit, I can simply glue them in place and wait for the glue to dry. This is just one of 8 wall panels like this. Above the side altars, there's a low flat roof that I made from styrene sheets. However, I need to cut out openings for the lantern domes that will sit over each side altar. It's easy enough to do, just score the styrene with a sharp blade right where you want to cut. It doesn't have to go all the way through, just deep enough to give the plastic a weak zone where it'll preferentially break. Now I'm also scoring it in wedges to facilitate this process. And with those cuts, it's not hard to just pop the pieces right out. So now I've made one hole, I still have to make 2 more for this sheet. Let's try the This Old Tony approach. That was easy. Before going any further, I'm going to do a dry assembly without glue to make sure it all fits together. That way I can make adjustments if any are needed. Only a complete imbecile would just jump straight into gluing pieces down without checking first. All of these pillars here are leaning over just a little bit. Forget you saw that. Let's fast forward through the assembly, because even sped up 100 times, it's going to take a little while. Now, I wasn't 100% sure the facade was going to fit with everything else. Oh, I can't express how satisfying it was when they snapped together.
Nice.
Since we know everything fits together, it's time to start gluing pieces. I decided to start by gluing together small units like this set of pillars and crossbeams. Small units would then be assembled into larger units. I won't glue the second level to the first until after the parts are all painted, but I still need to make sure they continue to fit together. In fact, much of the church will remain in bite-sized units until after painting, but the lower structure, which won't be seen and does not get painted, can be entirely glued together right now. Now we need something to put the church on. I asked our handyman Romano to get this piece of plywood, which he flattened out by screwing it to a welded metal frame. It'll make a perfect base for the model. I lined it all up and then marked the location of the edges. So next I painted the outer part black and attacked it with a drill right under the center where the dome would be. This will make a pass-through for the wires that power the lights. Okay, so now I can finally glue the skeleton to the base. I'm using regular school glue, which will make a decent bond with the wood base once it dries. The tricky part is making sure it lines up right. If I don't get it right now, it won't look good in the end. And to hold it down during drying, I'll borrow some weights out of my library. On the second level, as I said, I'll glue things together in bite-sized pieces that can still be disassembled for painting. And the transepts are a great example of this. I'll start by gluing a wall face to its structural frame for the right side transept. The right transept, above the side altar where St. Aloysius Gonzaga is buried, contains the geomagnetism laboratory, and it was here that Father Angelo Secchi studied the Earth's magnetic field and how it was affected by solar activity. Another piece of structure fits into some slots I conveniently thought to include when I originally designed the parts. And its face piece snaps into place. Ignore that I glued outside the lines. So now putting the two halves together and applying one last face piece, and the basic structure is assembled. On the inside, I want to separate the geomagnetism laboratory from the rest of the church so that they can be lit separately. And so I assemble this structure and a floor made out of styrene. But since you won't be able to look inside, I'm not going to bother to include any rooms or anything. It's just a light break. Finally, there's this window inset with exposed brick that gets glued in place. The brick detail was printed on the resin printer. The The left transept assembles by about the same method. The big difference here is that this side contains Secchi's offices, and I want you to be able to peek through the windows to look inside. This complex contained offices, a library, and the meteorografo, which was Secchi's invention to measure and record weather data. Today, it's at the observatory at Monte Porzio near Frascati. So I actually modeled and printed the offices, and for now I dry fit them in place. They won't be glued until after the interior is painted and the tiny details like Secchi's desk are installed. Next, we'll tackle the sides of the model. In preparation for that, I printed this bell tower that gets tucked away in the back corner of the church. Now, there aren't that many resin parts in this portion of the project, but this one is noteworthy. So I tried printing it originally in filament, but it didn't look so good, so I went to resin. And now it's time to put everything back together. Much of this project is taking things apart and reassembling them. And I'm getting pretty good at that. One side of the church faces the street and continues some of the features of the facade, such as columns, the elaborate cornices, and the walls themselves are not flat, but they're multi-leveled. I can reproduce the wall surfaces themselves with some sheets of styrene layered on top of each other, and so that's what I'm doing here. The border of this wall segment sticks out a bit, so I made a rectangle of trim that I'm gluing to the sheet. And there's this additional rectangle to break up the interior of that space a bit. I used another piece of styrene as a spacer to help position it properly. I 3D printed the columns and cornices, leaving space for wall segments. Here, I'm test fitting the door at the back corner of the church. And now that the walls are done, I can dry fit them to the model. I finally moved the model out of my office where it was eating all of my desk space. We found a spot for it in Sala Clavius, the refectory that we use for major functions, and the biennial Vatican Observatory summer school, when we bring in 25 of the best and brightest students from around the world to spend a month intensively studying one topic in astrophysics. The 2025 school will be about astronomy using the James Webb Space Telescope. Anyway, the room isn't being used at the moment, and so there's lots of space to work in. And it takes a little bit of careful handling to bang this wall into place, but in the end it fits nicely. The other two sides of the church abut other buildings of the campus of the Roman College, and I include them for completeness and context, but I don't want to give them any actual detail. It's just a basic framework and a few sheets of styrene for the walls. The closest I get to detail is this sheet of roof tiles that was left over from my original church project. So now to assemble it. This is pretty straightforward. I made it in 3 segments that just pop into place. Wow, we made a lot of progress on this video. This church is huge. I really didn't appreciate just how large or complex it would be until the structure was actually assembled. The material expenses of this project were supported by the Church of St. Ignatius in Rome. I've included a link in the description. I also couldn't have done all of this without access to the resources and facilities of the Vatican Observatory, such as video editing software. The purpose of the Vatican Observatory is to be a sign to the world of the compatibility of faith and science, and of the Church's support of science, and it could use your support. If you would like to support the work at the Vatican Observatory, or even just to learn a little bit more about it, there is a link in the description. Please check it out. There's also a lot more to do on this project, like the roof and the observatory, and of course painting the whole thing. Please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you will know as soon as the next installment is released. For now, I have to get back to working on this thing, so until next time, peace.